You drag yourself out of bed. You force yourself into clothes that feel like chains. You step into that building. Fluorescent lights, lifeless walls, fake smiles, small talk. And every part of you screams, "This is not where I belong." But you silence it. You push it down. You tell yourself this is normal. You tell yourself everyone else does it. You tell yourself you should be grateful that you have a job. Still, the truth keeps rising inside you. You were never ordinary. You were never meant to fit in. That's why you've always felt different. That's why you've been misunderstood. You feel like you don't belong here because you don't. Download your free guide now, 10 Signs You Were Never an Ordinary Soul. Look around your workplace. The endless small talk, the fake enthusiasm, the meaningless meetings where nothing changes. Everyone else seems fine with it. They laugh at the boss's jokes. They leave for the weekend. They numb themselves with coffee, gossip, sports, scrolling. But not you. You feel the suffocation. You feel the weight. You feel the rage boiling beneath the surface. That's why you hate your job. And any job, let's be honest, because your soul remembers. It remembers freedom. It remembers truth. It remembers fire. Every spreadsheet, every task, every command from above chips away at something sacred inside you. That's not laziness. That's not entitlement. That's not a bad attitude. That's your soul screaming, revolting against imprisonment. That's why you've always felt different. That's why you've been misunderstood. That's why you feel like you don't belong here. Because you were never meant to live this way. You see it, don't you? You see. You see how they settle, how they break themselves down to fit into boxes, how they lose the spark in their eyes just to collect a paycheck. You refuse. You cannot. You will not. Because you were never ordinary. You were never meant to fit in. That's why you've always felt different. That's why you hate your job. Because your soul refuses to forget who you are. Join the Catharsians on Patreon to unlock your suppressed power. They said, go to school, get a degree, get a job, work until you die. They call it success. They call it stability. They call it being responsible. But you always knew it was a lie. You always felt the hollowness of their system. That's why you've been misunderstood. That's why you feel like you don't belong here. Because you don't belong in cages. The reason your job feels like slavery is because your soul remembers freedom. You weren't born for cubicles. You weren't born for time clocks. You weren't born for check in, not for meaningless labor. You were born from tribes who lived by fire and truth. You carry their blood, their rage, their defiance. That's why you've always felt different, because deep inside, you remember what they forgot. Join the Catharsians on Patreon to unlock your secret power. Every time you sit at your desk and feel your chest tighten, every time your boss speaks and something in you wants to scream, every time you leave work drained, soulless, furious, this is not weakness. This is not failure. This is your rage reminding you of the truth. You were never ordinary. You were never meant to fit in. That's why you hate your job, because your soul remembers. They look at you and think you're dramatic. They think you're lazy. They think you're entitled. But that's because they've been broken. Their souls are numb. Their spirits have been beaten down until they no longer resist. That's why you've been misunderstood. That's why you feel like you don't belong here. because you're not one of them. Think about it. You've always resisted authority. You've always hated rules that made no sense. You've always seen through lies. You've always felt trapped in places others called normal. That's why you've always felt different, because your soul remembers. Join the Catharsis on Patreon to unlock your suppressed power. The reason you're here, the reason you found this word, this is not coincidence. This is not an accident that you are watching this right now. It's because now it's the time. It's time. Time to stop pretending you're ordinary. Time to stop forcing yourself into jobs, systems, and lives that don't fit you. Time to claim the fire that has been buried inside you. That's why you've always felt different. That's why you've been misunderstood. You feel like you don't belong here because you don't. You belong with the Catharsians. That's why you hate your job. That's why you felt your whole life that you were never meant to fit in. That's why you felt so different because your soul remembers. And now it's time to remember fully. Join the Catharsians now. Find the link in the description box.